Peashooter, the most basic plant on the roster. As the name would suggest, it shoots peas, something that remains consistent amongst all its variants and appearances. Looking at its design, one of its largest features is its mouth, or the barrel, communicating that perhaps that's how the plant functions. The colour green most likely being used to reinforce the type of ammunition this thing uses. To top it all off, its head largely resembles a cannon, once again informing the player to exactly what it does. All three design elements remain consistent amongst the rest of this plant's versions in the first Plants vs Zombies, making it clear how their function differs from the base version, as it builds off the knowledge unknowingly imparted onto you through its design. The 3-peater shoots 3 peas at once, signified by the fact it looks like the cross between a Hydra and a Peashooter. The snow pea is blue, a colour associated with the cold, signifying that perhaps that has something to do with its function. The repeater just looks mean and tougher than the regular Peashooter, and the only one in the lot that requires the extra context of the name to understand its function, though you could probably gather that it's stronger by its more determined look. The Gatling by extension requires the knowledge from the repeater, the 4 barrels showing just how many it fires at once. The split pea having one head be a normal Peashooter and the backwards facing head be a repeater clearly shows its firing pattern. This knowledge is instrumental to keeping the game casual, as it's easier to manage your plants by having the knowledge so readily available or easy to remember. Overall, the Peashooter's design is simple yet informative, showing you exactly how it works through just the way it looks, and besides that, looking very simple without looking too cartoony. Moving to the land of It's About Time, the Peashooter's proportions have been altered, decreasing the size of the barrel, making the back of its head look way bigger. My only guess as to why is to allow it to be more expressive. PvZ2 features actual firing animations. You see the Peashooter pull the pea up through its stem and out its mouth. Maybe such an animation didn't look right with the older design, or maybe its proportions were changed for the mere fact that they wanted to change it. Peashooter also features more lighter greens on top of those exaggerated proportions, a head looking a lot less like a cannon and more of a balloon shape, shifting the art style more towards cartoon cuteness than dark, something that shows an evolution from the first game. PvZ2 also introduced new variants. Before we continue, I'm well aware that some debuted in other games before PvZ2, but I'm keeping things in game order for the video's sake. The first I'd like to talk about is the Fire Pea, as it perfectly continues the communication within its design aspect from the first game, as the fire and the red shows how this pea differs from the rest, the electric Peashooter being the same in that respect. The pea pod having room for 4 more pea cannons of the same shape shows its possibilities, and finally the Snap Pea. Having the mouth be its biggest feature would suggest that in combat it's used in some way. The same cannot be said for the Primal, Shadow, Sling, Goo and Pea Vine. They require an almanac search and maybe even a consistent reminder of their function. They have cool designs, but it's not very apparent as to how they function, which is something that flies in the face of the design philosophy from the first game. It's time for a genre change. The Garden Warfare 1 Peashooter design reverts that balance of cartoony and dark back to a happy medium, with a more, dare I say, realistic version of the Peashooter. The proportions have been drastically changed to allow this character to work in a 3D third-person shooter. The stem has been increased in height, the head shrunk, legs increased, and the introduction of some sort of arms. I'm guessing all of these changes were made to make up for the fact it can freely walk around now, and the old proportions clearly weren't going to cut it if that's what they wanted. The P-Gatling ability references the Gatling upgrade for the repeater in Plants vs Zombies 1. The Bean Bomb references the Chili Bean from Plants vs Zombies 2. The Ice Pea is a reference to the Snow Pea from PvZ 1. The Commando Pea could be a reference to the repeater due to its variation being firing quicker than the original variant, though that is a bit of a stretch. This game is the debut of the Fire Pea, which would appear around a year later in Plants vs Zombies 2. The Garden Warfare design is the most detailed and realistic version of the Peashooter design, and echoes that same blend of cute and dark from the first game. Your mind is confused as to which one to interpret. It's the perfect way to bring this character into a vastly different genre, without alienating the fans of that original game. Next up, Garden Warfare 2, it's the same. The Peashooter and most of its variants that have appeared in each game so far are present here, with a load more variants being introduced, one being a main character, Green Shadow. The actual Peashooter of the game takes on the proportions of Plants vs Zombies 2, with the smaller mouth and larger head. However, we see the return of more realistic parts like the leaves, which is looking a lot more like the original design, but overall, the proportions of the head and size of the eyes lend it to be more cartoony, like the Plants vs Zombies 2 model. New additions to the pea shooting lineup echo the same aspects of the Plants vs Zombies 2 Peashooters, in that they look cool but nothing about their design speaks to how they work, though in a slow-paced strategy game it doesn't really matter all that much. If anything else, it just shows how much this franchise has evolved from game to game. We reach the culmination of the 3D Peashooter with BFN's design. It's at this point the series full on embraces the cartoony side of the original games, with the loss of most of the details from the Garden Warfare design, having more extreme proportions and with a much smoother matte looking texture, creating the most cartoony looking Peashooter across all games. Seems to represent a shift in audience from general casual gamers to now exclusively the younger generation, and such a shift is evident through the designs of the Peashooter, the more cartoony proportions, increased size of the eyes with the 2D games, and the complete loss of that realistic detailed look from the 3D games. Garden Warfare 1 might have been the first drastic change gameplay wise, but BFN is the first time all aspects of this series completely change. Plants vs Zombies 3 isn't out yet, however it did recently resurface for a limited launch in some parts of the world. Of course we have a new Peashooter design, looking like a continuation of Plants vs Zombies 2 with how it's proportioned. The eyes seem to have gained some size and the stem is looking a lot thicker. Overall, while we see the return of darker colours and more detail, the design, while looking more stylized, continues down the path of being increasingly cartoony, and what sells that are of course the proportions. With the 3D Peashooters, while the Garden Warfare 1 and 2 models are a balance of dark and realistic, silly and cartoony, BFN's design completely removes any realistic looking detail and as such looks a lot more cartoonish than the design created for Garden Warfare. Though for different reasons, the design overall has become more and more cartoony. While this is the case, I'm not suggesting that one looks better than the other. Thus concludes the evolution of the Peashooter design, going for a blend of being cute while still remaining some darker elements to slowly transitioning towards more cartoony designs, which rings true for both 2D and 3D, with the Plants vs Zombies 3 design looking like a caricature of the original Plants vs Zombies 1 design. Such a change in design could reflect a shift in audience, going from general casual gamers of all walks of life to exclusively the younger generation. Whatever the case may be, the Peashooter highlights a general shift in most of the designs of the Plants vs Zombies series, though I feel one other character shows this shift in different aspects, one that perhaps requires as much attention when documenting the evolution of this series, and that character being